As you know, USA has captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, accusing him of being involved in drugs and other criminal activities. Well, with USA wanting to get oil from Venezuela, which has the biggest oil reserves in the world, Canada is bound to feel threatened, considering USA is our biggest customer for the oil that we majorly get from Alberta. So today, to talk about how this is going to impact our economy and what Canada's next steps could be, we're talking to Heather Exner-Pyro, Director of Energy, Natural Resources and Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And I cannot think of anyone better to explain to Canadians what is going on. Thank you, Heather, for being here.
No, my pleasure.
My first question is, USA's taken the sitting president of a sovereign nation. Why is oil such a big part of the story?
So Venezuela is a very oil-rich country. It has very large reserves, potentially the largest reserves in the world. And so that has been part of what's interested certainly Donald Trump in bringing Venezuela back in line. And that's what's given it some power and some influence geopolitically and in its alignment with Russia, China, and Iran. Now, for Canada, why it matters is because Venezuela produces a very similar quality of oil. We both produce heavy oil. And so the sense is that they would be a competition for some of our exports to the United States.
Yeah, and USA is one of Canada's biggest customers. I mean, how much is Canada dependent on USA for oil?
Yeah, so I mean, you could say we're dependent on the United States. You could also say the United States is dependent on us. But oil is our biggest export, is about 25% of all of Canada's exports. And the bulk of that, 90%, goes to the United States. So around 4 million barrels a day that Canada sends to the United States. Most of that goes to the Midwest. To refineries around Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. But a couple 100,000 barrels make their way to Gulf Coast, and that's where Venezuela could be displacing or competing with us.
Yeah, I mean, if the US and President Trump has openly said that, they're going to go into Venezuela, they're going to rebuild the infrastructure, and they're going to try getting oil from there, what does that mean for Canada?
So there's a lot between, what Trump has said and actually getting that oil out of the ground and into markets in Venezuela. So it's obviously a very unstable jurisdiction right now. Venezuelan oil production has collapsed in recent years. Obviously, they had a socialist government, turned out to be a dictator. They nationalized industry and kind of kicked out private investment. And as a result, today they produce actually less than 1% of global oil production. So there's a sense that, you could recover some of those barrels fairly easily, maybe a couple 100,000, but it would take tens of billions of dollars of investment and many years to up it meaningfully by, let's say, 1 or 2 million barrels. So, and everything has to go right for that to happen. Obviously, there's still political instability. There's still a lot of corruption. There's still a lot of violence. And so there's still a lot of unknowns. Canada does have a few years to prepare for what may be a resurgence in Venezuelan oil, but it's not for sure.
Yeah, I mean, critics might argue that, the pipeline takes a long time to build, right? What can Canada's next steps be so that we're prepared in case that the Venezuelan oil goes on a global scale?
Yeah, great question. So we're already expanding some existing pipelines, and Bridges now it's about 400,000 of barrels that they're going to expand to the United States. And Trans Mountain, which just started operating just 2 years ago, finally bringing Canadian oil to Pacific Tidewater and to Asia, has already announced its plans to further expand the pipeline by about 360,000 barrels. So there's quite a bit of room to grow Canadian production in the next 4 years. But yeah, everyone is hoping at the end of that, let's say by 2030, that there is a new pipeline. Alberta is planning to propose, put in the submission by July 1st of this year.
Yeah, with Alberta as well, I mean, there's a lot of tensions going on there. Alberta is trying to leave Canada, become sovereign. So what's going to happen to BC's economy if Alberta leaves Canada?
Well, these are all worst case scenarios. So there's certainly a faction, let's say, between 25 and 30% of Albertans who indicate in polls that they'd be interested in separating, and likely to be a referendum actually later this year. I think things like this that happen in Venezuela maybe make those less likely, that it doesn't seem like, we were better off running to Donald Trump's embrace. But it will create some uncertainty. I think it's in everyone's best interest now to have less drama, have the ability to export oil and gas, without all these political tensions, without being a political football. And it does feel like it's not Ottawa that's the problem anymore, but it's BC and David Eby's government. And so trying to sort out what could be a compromise, between us exporting, building a pipeline through BC to get to those Asian markets seems more important, more urgent than ever.
Yeah, I mean, what can Canada do economically right now to protect its interests? Because we know when that USA goes into another country, they can be fast, especially when that's going to help them. It's going to be in their interest. So what should Canada's next steps be right now to ensure that they're protecting our economy? Because we're seeing what's happening already. Canadia's oil stocks are down already. America's oil stocks are up already. So what can the immediate next steps be?
Well, again, I think just providing that political support, giving the market assurance that we are going to grow and diversify. I think some of that, the stocks falling yesterday, was a little bit on vibes, not on analysis. Chevron's already a bit corrected. Suncor's corrected. So we'll see what happens in the next week or two. But again, it is creating, an environment in Canada that is attractive for foreign investment and ensuring to markets other than the United States that we can reliably export these goods and get it to them in a quickly and timely way. We do expect actually some LNG final investment decisions, FIDs, this quarter on Silicim's LNG and the Prince Rupert gas transmission, and hopefully by the end of the year on LNG Canada Phase 2. That's great for BC's economy. You're going to have to produce a lot more natural gas, and then you'll be able to liquefy it and export it. And that's a very meaningful way for Canada to diversify who we send these exports of energy to.
Yeah, I think the biggest compromise that's being made is, I think, Indigenous lands. The pipeline being built there has been the biggest kind of hindrance in BC. So you being in natural resources, is Director of Natural Resources and Energy, what would the compromise look like on that political level to ensure that we're reaching a compromise which is economically profitable, but we're also ensuring that we are respecting Indigenous lands?
Yeah, and actually the oil and gas industry, I would say, has been on the vanguard of figuring out this difficult solution, and the main thing is even on those LNG projects that I just mentioned, some of them are Indigenous-led now. The other one, Cedar LNG, is Indigenous-led. And in most of these projects, in all new pipelines, there will be Indigenous equity, where a consortium of Indigenous groups will get a loan backed by the federal government or the Alberta government or the BC government and be able to buy into these pipelines so that they get a share of the revenues like owners would at the end of the day. So it's definitely the expectation and has been discussed. I think it's a consensus that a new oil pipeline to the Northwest Coast would have Indigenous ownership that would be backed by various governments, and that would help pave the way for Indigenous consent, or at least, accommodating some of the concerns that they have.
So reaching a compromise that's a win-win for everyone involved. They're also getting profit off their own land. And we're making sure that Canada's economy is protected. We're making sure that our self-interests are protected. We're maybe exporting oil somewhere else, not just being dependent on USA, and maybe doing it as fast as possible.
This is why I love resource extraction. Because Canada has so much, we can all be winners. And these things are not only good for Canada, it's good for our allies, and I think it's good for the world when people can access Canadian oil and natural gas, not have to depend on Russia, not have to depend on Iran, not have to depend on a socialist Venezuela. And so, I think, these are low-hanging fruit. I always say, there's 200 countries that wish they had the problems that Canada has. Our only problem is getting it our own way and making a ton of money, bringing energy to our allies.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your insights, Heather. That was Heather Exner-Pyro, who has explained more in detail about how this is going to impact us. Yes, this is a story that has happened in USA and USA going into Venezuela, but this is going to have a huge impact on Canada, our economy, and our jobs. This story is developing and we'll continue covering, letting you know what it means for us as Canadians. I'm Manraj Grewal. Keep watching Prime Asia TV.